Hi, I'm Steve Spencer from SMB Capital Prop Trading Firm in New York City. Today's video, we're going to discuss something that we'll see during earnings season, which is one company reports bad news, and that company's bad news can quite often be good news for another company. Today we're going to look at a trade in AMD, which was based on a catalyst from Intel. But before we get into the details of how I selected these stocks to trade today, which were both in play because of the news, I wanted to make you aware that we still have our 2-hour free workshop where I spend 30 minutes going over my stock selection process in detail. I also go over, with my partner Mike Bellafiore, 3 low-risk, high-reward trading setups during this 2-hour workshop. If you're interested, sign up in the link above. And while you sign up, this video will continue to roll. So, getting to today's trade. First of all, this is something we see fairly regularly throughout the year, where a company will report some news. The news is negative for the company, but actually will be positive for other companies. And we see this most often actually in the biotech sector, where we'll see a company where they have a drug trial will fail, and then there's other companies with competing products, and normally they'll go up right away. We also see this during earnings season when a company will report negative earnings, and perhaps people will look to buy a competitor because they believe that company's loss is another company's gain. In the case of Intel, we know it has only one competitor, even though it's a much smaller company than Intel, which is AMD. So before we even got into the trading day, we knew Intel was going to report after the close, and I started talking to the junior trader on our desk who actually assists me in trading one of my accounts, about would there be a trade in AMD depending on what happens with Intel. Intel reports, they guided lower, the stock's getting hammered, and so we started talking about, okay, what are we going to do tomorrow? How could we trade in AMD on the long side if Intel is down? And so what I'm going to walk you through is kind of our process of the notes that we had for Intel, the notes we had for AMD, what we were thinking about in terms of 2 ways we were going to approach trading AMD depending on what the price action looked like this morning, and take it from there. So here was the catalyst. You can see a lot of negative news there. They lowered guidance, a bunch of the large firms, sell-side firms making some negative comments, and so we had Intel going down. And so here's the initial reaction from Intel. You can see yesterday was a $50 stock. In the after hours, it dropped to 46, kind of popped back up to 47 and failed. This morning, in the pre-market, was up at 47 again, then going down to 46. So the stock really had not bounced, was well down off of yesterday's close, was negative. And we wanted to see what AMD was doing in relation to Intel. If AMD opened down and went positive, and Intel was still very down quite a bit, that relative strength would give us confidence to play AMD on the long side, and at the same time look for possibly a breakdown in Intel. But our focus in this video is actually on AMD. So here are the notes from the morning game plan, which we actually shared on Twitter this morning. Here is the chart on AMD, and you can actually see there's a few interesting points to be made here. On the chart, AMD initially, when Intel reported the numbers and gave poor guidance, you can see AMD traded down to $20 a share. Then very quickly got back above 2050, and this morning when we came in was even higher, up around 21. So we already know the initial reaction for AMD when Intel warned was down, but by the next morning the market had digested that news and said what was bad for Intel was not bad for AMD. We actually think that Intel, this is more isolated to them as a company, not the sector overall. And by the way, the backdrop, I should talk a little bit about the sector and market backdrop we're in right now. Right now we're in a very strong market. The market's been going up for about a month. After the initial bounce the day after Christmas, we consolidated, we moved higher. And then a couple of weeks ago, we consolidated again and moved higher. Over the last few days, we consolidated again, and this morning we broke out of this 3-day consolidation, I guess it was, and started to move higher. So the backdrop was strong, very strong market. And then the sector, we know some of these chip stocks have moved up quite a bit over the last few days. We know XLNX was very strong yesterday, made a new all-time high. We know Applied Materials, AMAT, was very strong yesterday, moving higher today. And so, look, the chip sector, it's not a monolith. Some of these companies are obviously doing different things, but we know that the market is strong, we know the sector is strong, and even though Intel itself is weak, there's people looking to put money back to work in this sector. And so that was the other thing kind of that was pushing us to look for how we could play AMD on the long side. So here are the game plan notes. AMD, we had a support 20, the after hours low from yesterday, 2050, kind of what it bounced to, or a key level on the longer term. And what you can see here is it pulled back over the last couple of weeks to below $20 a share, but over the last few days, when it got above 2050, that had been prior resistance a couple of weeks ago. And so our expectation really wasn't that it was going to flush down to 20 what it did in the after hours. Our expectation was people would recognize with the strength and how it bounced the dollar from the after hours low that there was a good chance it would actually take out recent resistance levels and move to higher prices. And so what you can see here on the multi-week 30-minute chart is some resistance at 21 and then some resistance at 2030. And this is basically how we came up with our levels for the morning game plan. So we had the support levels I just talked about, and then we had resistance at 21, 2130, and then 2250. Our expectation was not that it could get to the third resistance level today, but if it closed above R2 today, we would just take it as a swing trade and for some upside follow through, similar to what AMAT had did yesterday and today. And so that's our game plan coming in. And you can see actually in the notes, the junior trader, he actually put in the notes, Jeff is his name, by the way. He put in the notes that if we actually got some weakness early in AMD right in the open, if it flushed lower, then maybe we could pick up some calls really cheap. That would be our one way to play it with options. But if it wasn't weak on the open and the calls didn't get cheap, we might as well just play it on the long side with stock. And so the plan basically was, if it took out R1, resistance 1 at 21, went up very quickly on the open to R2, that we would try to get long between R1 and R2. Quite often what you'll see, if we go back to what it did on the open, you can see here I have the notes. If it pops up to that top blue line, which was R2, and then pulls in, we'll start to get long into R1. Resistance becomes support. I'm sure you've heard that before. Support becomes resistance. When resistance is broken, it becomes support. So right on the open, boom, big green bar. Fails at the longer term resistance, which we have as R2. We're not concerned about that. That's actually our expectation. People buy on the open, it gets to it, it pulls back a little bit. It gives us a chance to get in at R1 because it becomes support now. We get in as it pulls in there, and then if in the late morning or the afternoon it takes out R2, then we look for it to trend up the rest of the day, maybe lighten up into the close, swing trade to 2250 on the following trading day. And so that's kind of, it was pretty much idealized in terms of they bought on the open, it pulled back, we were able to buy into the pullback. Midday, it moves back up to R2 again. And by the way, if you're buying into that support there at 21 and it pops back up to 2130, 2140, if you want to sell a little bit there to cover your risk on the trade, that's a perfectly acceptable way to handle the trade. And that's actually how we handled the trade. I wanted to point out to you, if we go back to the Intel chart, the initial reaction to earnings, you see in the morning, Intel's first move was down. So we have Intel being sold while AMD is being bought. Now the cool thing about this was it actually held the after hours low and support right on the open and then kind of stabilized between 46 and 47. So we knew we were already long AMD. Intel has stabilized. So we think if Intel actually starts to move higher in the late morning or the middle of the day above 47, perhaps that'll add a little bit more fuel to the fire for AMD. And that's what happened. You can see middle of the day chart, Intel afternoon view. It moved up above 47. AMD, actually middle of the day, you can see took out the morning high, then trended all the way up to about $22 a share. And the interesting thing about this was as AMD was trending, Intel actually failed at above 47 and came back down below, but notice that AMD never broke its uptrend, just continued higher, moved sideways, and then as we speak into the close, was right up at the high of the day. And so I would say it was pretty close to best case scenario in terms of buyers stepped in on the open, pulled back to our level to buy, middle of the day took out R2, then started to trend. Intel caught a bid, so the whole sector was moving higher together. When Intel rolled over in the afternoon, AMD never started to roll over. And so this was pretty much played out the way that we wanted it to, and was best case scenario. We're taking it into the close. We'll look for upside follow through on the next trading day. For those of you who haven't gotten in yet, If you're looking for a spot to buy on Monday, so we're going to post this video before then, if we can get a quick flush on the open down to 2140, 2150, that would be the spot where I would look for buyers to step in. Hope you learned something here. Hope you can use this in the future.